In today's video lesson, we will be completing the poem. The last two stanzas of the poem were left. I will be giving you a line by line explanation of the last two stanzas of the poem A Legend of the Northland by Phoebe CARY. We shall then move on to the textual questions and answers. Children, in the last class, we had read that Saint Peter had cursed the old lady and she was changed to a bird. Why was she cursed? Because she was very greedy and a miser. The saint was preaching the message of compassion, brotherhood, humanity, and kindness. And this lady, she did not even give a small piece of cake to the saint who had arrived at her doorstep. Now, that small piece of cake could have satisfied the hunger of that saint. But the old lady, she was so selfish and she was so greedy that she did not give him even a small piece of cake to eat. And hence she was cursed and changed to a bird. She was made to realize that much effort is required to gather food. That life is not easy in the open, in that biting cold land of the Northland. She was forced to collect her food by boring and boring the whole day long. And at the end of the day, she could gather very little food. The expression used in the poem is scanty food. Now let's read what happens next. She had a scarlet cap on her head, and that was left the same. But all the rest of her clothes were burned black as a coal in the flame. Now, children, scarlet. Scarlet is a red color. So here she was wearing a red colored cap. Now that was left intact. That did not burn with the rest of her clothes. Now this is again an element of supernatural contained in the poem. If the rest of her clothes had burnt, children, then why not that scarlet cap? Now the red colored cap, we can take it as if it was symbolizing that the woman is a sinner. By not giving the saint a piece of cake to eat, which could have satisfied his hunger, she had committed a sin, a folly. So, the scarlet cap or the red cap on her head was like an identification mark that she has been cursed. Why? Because she has committed a sin. So that scarlet cap or the red colored cap, children, was a kind of an identification mark, so that people could realize that yes, because she had committed a sin, she has been transformed into a bird. She has been cursed. And this scarlet cap is the identification mark. So please try to relate the scarlet cap to the explanation, children, to this stanza. So she had a scarlet cap on her head, which was like an identification mark that she has been cursed because of her sin. And that was left the same. That did not change. That did not get burnt with the rest of her clothes. But all the rest of her clothes were burned black as a coal in the flame. And the rest of the clothes, children, they were burned. See, it's written over here. And black as a coal in the flame. Again, a comparison has been drawn, black as a coal. So the poetic device used here is simile. So again, listen to this explanation. Just rewind it and listen to the explanation. Very important stanza of the poem, children. The poetic device used in the last line is simile. Let's move on to the last stanza of the poem, children. And every country schoolboy has seen her in the wood, where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food. Now, every schoolboy, now this story, it is especially for the schoolboys, for the young children, so that they can learn a lesson from this, that we have to be, or we should be, compassionate and considerate towards our fellow beings. We should help them. We should be kind towards them. Otherwise, God will punish us, and we too shall be cursed. So every country schoolboy has seen this bird in the wood, in the forest, where she lives in the trees till this very day. Means that even today one can find that bird with that scarlet cap on her head in the forest. Now this is again an element of supernatural contained in the poem, away from reality. Boring and boring for food, and till date she is gathering her food, her scanty food, by boring and boring and boring, by drilling the wood like a woodpecker. So this is the end of the poem, children. The symbols contained in the poem, the poetic devices contained in the poem, and the supernatural elements contained in the poem. Now you will make a list of this. You will take down the notes and make a list of the poetic devices used in the poem. Second, the symbols used in the poem. For example, the scarlet cap. What does it symbolize? And third, you will also write about the supernatural elements contained in the poem. So this is your task for the day, children. You are going to write these 3 points you are going to cover in today's assignment. Listen to the explanation again. Now let's move on to the questions and answers, children, the textual questions and answers. Which country or countries do you think the Northland refers to? Children, I have already given you this answer while explaining you the poem and while giving you a brief introduction. Here again I am giving you the answer. The Northland may refer to any extremely cold country located in the Earth's north polar region. Okay, so children, refer to the explanation video, the introductory video lesson that I had uploaded on this poem. So please refer to that video lesson also for extra information. What did Saint Peter ask the old lady for? What was the lady's reaction? Saint Peter asked the old lady for a piece of cake. And why did he ask the old lady for a piece of cake? Because it is written in the poem, he was faint with fasting. Isn't it? He had been preaching all day long, and at the end of the day, he was very tired and very hungry too. He had reached the doorstep of a lady and had demanded for a piece of cake. The lady tried to bake a small cake for the saint, but as the cake was baking, she noticed that it seemed too big to give away. Isn't it? Every time she put the small dough for baking, what would happen? It would swell and it seemed too big to give away. So she kneaded a smaller dough each time. She found that this one too was as big as the first one. So she took a much smaller piece of dough and rolled it thin as a wafer. Now, this was really a miserly act of the lady, isn't it, children? So she rolled it thin as a wafer. She again couldn't part with it and put it on the shelf. And finally, what happened? She did not give anything to Saint Peter to satisfy his hunger. I had used another word for this, what you say, greedy, for miser. I had used another word for miser, and I have used it in the video lectures, children. So you will be writing the answer, the synonym for miser that I have used in my explanation. Let's move on to the next question. How did he punish her? He punished the lady by changing her into a woodpecker. She was now forced to build a nest to live in and gather food by boring the hard wood all day long. Okay, so this should be easy, children. She was cursed by Saint Peter, who changed her to a woodpecker. And she was now forced to build a nest by collecting the twigs in the biting cold. And how did she gather her food? The scanty food by boring the hard wood all day long. Let's move on to the next question. How does the woodpecker get her food? The woodpecker gets its food by boring holes into hard and dry woods of the trees. Okay, so what does the woodpecker do? The woodpecker, it bores it drills the hard, dry woods of the trees, and then it eats the worms that it can find by boring the wood. So this should also be easy, and you can also write this answer on your own, children. Now let's move on to the next slide. Do you think that the old lady would have been so ungenerous if she had known who Saint Peter really was? What would she have done then? No, the old lady would not have been so ungenerous then. Instead, she would have welcomed him and shown much hospitality by offering him large pieces of cake to eat. Children, you know, this is human nature that we tend to behave in the best possible way in front of our guests, right? We don't want to offend them, and hence we behave in the best possible manner. Had she known that the man who has arrived at her doorstep was the messenger of Lord Christ, Saint Peter was the messenger of Lord Christ. Had she known this, that the man at her doorstep was no ordinary man, but the messenger of Lord Christ, she wouldn't have behaved in the way she had behaved, right? She wouldn't have behaved in that manner. She would have welcomed him and shown much hospitality towards him. Let's move on to the next question now. Is this a true story? Which part of this poem do you feel is the most important? No, this is not a true story, it is a legend. The most important part of this poem is the one in which Saint Peter turns the old lady into a woodpecker to teach her a lesson. Yes, you know, legends and a ballad, children, it's a long poem with a moral contained in it. Now, the moral contained in this poem is the most important part of this ballad. Now, this incident has a mass message for all. We get to learn the important values of being generous and kind towards our fellow beings. We should be thankful for we have got an opportunity to enjoy all the comforts and luxuries of life. However, at the same time, we should help the needy and should also be considerate towards the less privileged in the society. And children, if we cannot fulfill this basic duty which is expected of a human being, we are not fit to be in this form on earth. Isn't it? We are doomed. We shall be cursed. And this is the most important part of the poem. The most important incident is the message contained in the poem. Let's move on to the next question. What is a legend? Why is this poem called a legend? A legend is an old popular story which is believed by many to be true, but one cannot prove whether it is true or not. It usually contains a message or a moral and is often narrated to children. Why? Because children, they pick up a lot from these stories, isn't it? They learn much from such stories. This poem is a traditional story narrated to the children of the Northland. As the story has a supernatural element contained in it, its authenticity cannot be verified. Children, the supernatural elements contained in the poem, in a ballad, they are away from reality. Magical powers, ghosts, supernatural elements, these are all features of a ballad which takes the story away from reality. Hence, its authenticity cannot be verified. We cannot say that the story is true. The poet himself says that he doesn't believe this tale to be true. In the very opening stanzas, children, he says, he confesses that I don't believe this tale to be true. Moreover, the poem gives a message of being kind and considerate towards fellow beings. Now, this is the central message contained in the poem, which is the most important part of this ballad, of this long poem. Okay, children, we have done the question answers, the textual questions and answers. Now, one question is left, and that is question number 8. Write the story of a legend of the Northland in about 10 sentences. Now, this is the question number 8 contained in your reader on page 67. This you have to do on your own. Write the story of a legend of the Northland in about 10 sentences. So, sum up. I don't want you to write in sentences, children. I want you to write a paragraph on it. Okay. So, you have to write a paragraph in order to sum up the whole story. So, sum up the whole poem in the form of prose. Okay. So, the prose should contain 10 sentences. So, it should be like a short 1 paragraph story. So, the 8th question is another task. Now, the last slide, let's move on to that. Children, the last slide contains extra questions on this poem. You are expected to write the answers by referring to the video lectures I have already posted. Now, use the points and the extra information that I have given to you while explaining this poem. So, refer to these video lectures that I have already posted and then attempt these questions. Thank you.